I'll bring this Committee of the Whole meeting to order, Friday, May the 28th at 10 a.m. and to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of Stahelis. And the next order of business, please.
Yes, Your Worship, we'll move on to number 2. Do you have any late items?
Not have any late items. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on. Number 3 and have approval of the agenda, please.
Moved by Councillor Piper, seconded by Councillor Hooper. All in favor?
Aye, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to number 4, items for discussion. This morning we have a report from the planning consultant. This is regarding development procedures amendment bylaw.
Mr. Cussy?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is consideration of amendment to the Village's Development Procedures Bylaw number 1090, 2016. This matter was referred before Council at the regular meeting of Council on August the 6th and was referred back for consideration at a Committee of the Whole meeting. As per the requirements of the Local Government Act, the Village has in place Development Procedures Bylaw 1090, 2016. This bylaw is required as the Village has adopted an official community plan and a zoning bylaw. This type of bylaw is required as it outlines the process that the Village will use when either issuing a permit or looking at an amendment to either to both the zoning bylaw and the OCP bylaw. Currently, this bylaw is 5 years old and an administrative review was completed, and it was determined that various updates were required. In summary, the amendment changes are outlined below, and basically there's 7 amendments, 7 changes that we're going to be discussing, with the 2 biggest being points number 5 and number 6, which we'll get to in a few minutes. The first changes is to revise the definition of highway so that the definition is the same as the one used in the current zoning bylaw. And for your reference and review, the change is outlined in text section 2.1 of the amendment bylaw. In addition to this, we've added the new definition of works and services, and this definition was taken from the new draft subdivision servicing bylaw. In addition to using the new definition, we needed to insert the new definition into various parts of the bylaw. And for your reference and review, the changes are outlined in text sections 2.2, 2.4, 2.7, 2.12, and 2.15 of the amendment bylaw. We also, when we were reviewing it, we realized that there's some words such as shall that have to be changed to must in various parts of the current bylaw. And for your reference and review, the changes are outlined in text sections 2.3, 2.6, and 2.16 of the amendment bylaw. We also cleaned up some of the typos, and for your reference and review, the changes are outlined in sections 2.5, 2.8, 2.13, and 2.14 of the amendment bylaw. The first biggest change was we've inserted new Advisory Planning Commission meeting requirements, and this was needed to clarify that the applicant can make a presentation to the Advisory Planning Commission and answer any questions that the APC may have with respect to their application. This type of clarity removes any expectation that staff is going to make the presentation on behalf of the applicant. As the APC meeting is in an open public meeting, this will also provide the community the ability to hear additional details on the proposed application prior to any public hearing being held. And for your reference and review, the change is outlined in text section 2.9 of the amendment bylaw. The second biggest change is, as I mentioned, is in point 6, and this creates a new development review process. The current process requires that staff come to council on every application and request approval to work on the application. On occasion, council has asked staff to provide additional comments on the application, which staff cannot answer as we have not done any work or research on the application. With the amendment bylaw, council has pre-approved staff to work on the application only. This work will include any research finding that staff may come across and will outline any impacts that the development may have on the neighborhood, if applicable. And for your reference and review, the changes are outlined in sections 2.10, 2.11, and 2.20 of the amendment bylaw. And the final change Your worship, is we've removed the concept of minor variances. And for your reference and review, the changes are outlined in text sections 2.17, 2.18, and 2.19 of the amendment bylaw. And the recommendation is that Development Procedures Amendment Bylaw 1160-2021 be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Cossie. So we have a recommendation. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Piper. Thank you. Now I'll go around the table to start with Councillor Vidal.
Thank you, Your Worship. Apologies for lack of video to our attendees. I believe that our tech people are working on it. I do want to thank for the report. It's an extensive report. The one question that I do have for our planner is in the flow chart, I don't see sort of like any indication of if and when an application should be referred to our APC. I'm wondering if he could comment on that for me.
Mr. Cossie?
Yes, Your Worship. That is at the discretion of council. Anytime that you get the report in front of you and you get a referral list, you can change or add to that list as and when you require. So we can't predetermine anybody, any agency or anything else that it's going to go to. Council has to decide that on a case-by-case situation. And as I mentioned, we will put some recommendations in front of you, and you can either accept them, reject them, or modify them as you see fit.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cossie. I have nothing further right now, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I just have one small question, and then I actually have a couple of comments. Mr. Cossie, the draft that's before us today, is that the same draft that came forward on April 6th when it came to council before, or have there been any amendments since that time?
Mr. Cossie?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the report is basically the same. There's been some changes to the flow chart in the way that it's been outlined from the April meeting.
All right. So if I can just take a moment or two. When the matter came in April, I had two concerns that I expressed. One of which was I wasn't certain that I appreciate or that I supported the idea of removing the first reference to council wherein we get to make a decision whether or not the village will work with the applicant, thereby authorizing you to spend time and money working with the applicant. And I know that's what this draft does, and I had some concerns about that. I'll come back to that in a second. The other area that I had a concern about is, and I know a lot of what we're doing today is housekeeping, and I appreciate that. The other area I had a concern is that there's nothing in here. There is, yes, some wording about how the APC will deal with applications, but there's nothing indicating what goes to the APC. And I think that's a major problem, because I think in the last the years that I've been on council, precious little has gone to the APC. And that concerns me. Now, I know it's an advisory committee and ultimately decisions rest with council, but I do think that we're missing the opportunity for community engagement with the APC. So I'd hoped, I'd raised those two issues before, and I had hoped that I would see them reflected in a further draft. Now, those are my two major issues. Going back to the first, I have thought my way through that, and I recognize that what we're doing by asking for council approval before we even start the process, I do understand there's some concern that when that happens, if we were to refuse, and we've refused somebody's application without giving them a fair hearing, because at that time they haven't had an opportunity to present a case. So I do see the risk of that. So I've worked my way around to having less concern about that change, although I have always appreciated that, because then council and anybody who reads agendas at least has an idea that a development process is started on a particular property. And I like that. I like that early warning, if you will, so that it's not just you see the application 3 days before a council meeting, but we have an idea what's going on, because we will soon start seeing feedback in the community about it. And so I kind of liked that. So, I mean, it wouldn't be the idea of us not voting, having to vote to authorize our consultant to work with the applicant. I can accept that, but I'd like to replace that with some report to council simply that that application is being processed, so that we know that, whether it shows up in a formal report or, but I do think it's a value. I like to know what applications that are going on before it actually comes down to we're making a decision, and again, it shows up on a Thursday and we're deciding on a Monday. So that's one thing I would like to, so I've worked my way around that, but I'd like at least have it replaced with something where there's a report. The second area I really do feel we need to deal with. You know, I understand the APC, we can refer to it, but again, when the item comes forward for a decision for a variance, we haven't been doing that because the process isn't there. I looked at the proposed amendments, and I actually, once again, as I did before, pulled out the act and wrote out all the changes again so that I had an idea what it looked like. And I come down to thinking a couple of things. First off, in the proposed bylaw making the changes, you refer in your summary to the three sections that refer to the changes that affect APC. And I don't have a 211 in my package, and I printed it twice. So I just go from 210 to 212. And 211 is one of the paragraphs that Mr. Cossey, that you refer to as having an impact on that. So I'm a little confused, but more to that, I would like to see us have wording in here and that says basically that where we're talking about referrals in number 12, in terms of the process, I would like to have something that says that staff shall, unless directed otherwise by council, refer the applications to the advisory planning committee. So I'd like to have a default where it goes to that committee, unless it comes to council and we say, no, in this case, it's not appropriate. Because the way we're doing it right now, almost nothing is going. So it seems to me to be a wasted committee and a real possibility to get community input. So that is a change that I really feel needs to be in this proposed bylaw changes. So that's I think I'll let everybody discuss. If there was a consensus, I would like to make an amendment to that or propose an amendment to that, or maybe it comes back at a subsequent meeting with that in where someone's been able to consider the words. But I would really like to have something that causes things automatically to go to APPC, that staff would send it automatically, because the way we're going, it hasn't been happening really at all. Thank you.
Mr. Cossey, before you answer, I just want to ask the corporate officer a question here for clarification. My understanding is, and it's funny, this came up last night as well. My understanding is that the APC is an advisory committee, and the whole object is for them to discuss land issues and OCPs, that sort of thing, not variances. Is that correct?
Your worship, the Advisory Planning Commission is regulated under the legislation and to advise and review matters of land use. Now, I would defer that to the planner, your worship.
Mr. Cossey?
Yes, your worship. The only thing that you shouldn't refer to the Advisory Planning Commission is your development permit applications, because the development permit application, the requirements and the guidelines are already inside of inside the official community plan that has been adopted. It's a lot of times when you refer a development permit out, people figure that they can start going after the land use concept again, and they cannot do that. So, because the only thing that is happening is that they're providing the additional information as required by the adopted official community plan. But if the council wishes, you can send out your zoning amendments and all the other ones out to the referral agents or to the Advisory Planning Commission.
And this is at the call of the council?
Yes, it should be it should be on a case-by-case situation, and it's completely controlled by council.
Thank you. I'll let you answer any other questions Any other answers you have for Councillor Palmer?
No, no, I have no other answers, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Piper?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to Mr. Cossey for going over it with a fine tooth comb. I appreciate that. I think it installs some efficiencies because the ultimate decision does come back to council. That's our responsibility. So I think especially number 6 in the report certainly instills efficiency, best way to put it. And I think if we proceed with that process, when it does come in front of council, it's going to provide us opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation. Staff will have more answers for us. If it was when these matters come before us and we're just granting permission for staff to start working on it, I have found that we're asking as council a number of questions that can't be answered. So that's why I think it would bring some efficiencies to our decision-making processes. And I think, yeah, that's all I've got to say. I think it's a great update, and I appreciate the time put into it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Piper. Councillor Hooper?
Good morning there. Yeah, the only problems I have is on what you've numbered as section 2.17 to 2.20 on the variance. Are we doing away with the word minor in the variance?
Mr. Cossey?
Yes, Your Worship. The concept of minor variance is a subjective concept. What I may view as minor, others may view as quite large. So it's just we're removing that subjective analysis from the bylaw. So it'll just be any variance.
So any variance to the development process would immediately come back to council?
Mr. Cossey?
Any development variance permit or any other changes as required will come to council, yes.
And that would include land use, setbacks and building heights?
Oh, yeah, yes. Anytime there's a development variance permit application, council is the ultimate decision maker, and you have it is a discretionary power. You're not required to say yes to it, and you're not. And if you want, you can say no, or you can say we can issue it subject to conditions.
Right. So just to be clear, there will be no more minor variance. It'll just be all variance.
All variance, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from councillors? Councillor Palmer?
Your Worship, so going back to my earlier comment, I would like to propose that the matter be sent back to staff to have the insertion of provisions that allow, that set out that matters will be referred to the APC except for development permits automatically unless council directs otherwise. So that the default would be to be referred to APC.
We need a seconder for that? No, we don't. So I'll just call that Councillor Palmer has made that motion. I'll call the question. All in favour? Anybody opposed?
Opposed, Your Worship.
2 opposed. So I think what's written in the report here adequately addresses areas of concern, and and council have the discretion to move to forward what they think or to the APC at any time. So I'll sorry, Councillor Piper, you have a comment?
Yes, sorry, Your Worship, I don't mean to interrupt. I just, I'd like to express why I don't support that motion, if I may.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, my concern is there's a number of other entities or agencies that should also be included in consultation. So my fear is if, and I really believe it's the position of council to ask for that referral. So my fear is if it's just an automatic, that perhaps those other agencies that do provide valuable feedback and input would be left out. So I do think it's the responsibility and judgment of council to make that call. Thank you.
Yes,
Your Worship.
thank you. And I believe on Mr. Coss's reports when we receive them, it does, I can recall the last one we received, it does put there if there's any outside agencies to be contacted. It's up to the discretion of council, that which Councillor Piper just brought up. So I'm opposed, so the motion fails. Thank you. Next order of business, please.
Yes, Your Worship, we'll have to vote on the main motion, please.
Now we vote on the main motion. All in favor? 1,
Aye,
2,
Your
3.
Worship.
In favor, opposed? Opposed, Councillor Palmer. Motion passes. Thank you. And the next order of business, please.
Yes, Your Worship, we'll move on to the next item, and that is the report from the financial officer, and this is regarding a reserve and surplus policy.
Ms. Jones? Oh, thank you, Mr. Cossey. It's gone. Sorry, Ms. Jones.
This is good. Thank you, Your Worship, through you to council. We're just setting up a PowerPoint presentation here for council this morning. The issue is to provide an updated report on the status of reserves and draft a reserve and surplus policy. At the December 7th, 2020 regular council meeting, council directed staff to provide an update on the status of reserves and develop a reserve and surplus policy. An update to the reserves was included in the 2020 audited financial statements adopted by council on April 6, 2021. The attached reserve and surplus policy is here for council's consideration, and the recommendation is that the draft reserve and surplus policy be approved. I now have a presentation for council to give some more information on the draft reserve and surplus policy. There are a number of different types of reserves, and the first one I want to talk about today are reserve accounts. These reserves are discretionary appropriations of surplus identified by council for inclusion, usually in the budget. They're established to meet operational needs. They can be established by council direction to meet changing operational needs. What we're proposing in this draft reserve and surplus policy, that these reserves should be financial stabilization reserve, a combined insurance legal reserve, an elections reserve, employee future benefits, and fire department operating reserve. Included in the policy is a brief description of what each of these reserves would include and what they're for. Just a quick overview of the financial stabilization reserve account. This would be established for the following purpose: for any major emergent operating issues, such as if the village is exposed to major non-recurring costs related to various emergency events, things like storms, wildfires, or other environmental hazards. These types of situations can't be anticipated and budget for it, and it's not feasible to absorb the costs of such events in other budget areas in any specific year. They would also be used to offset unrealized revenues. If any of the village's revenue sources experienced a drop in revenue due to an unusual event, things like bad weather, things like storms might impact the paid parking fees. We've seen where the pandemic has affected our rental revenue. And if there was a drop in need for development fees or downturns in the economy, this reserve would help offset any loss of revenue that we might experience in a year, and therefore would not necessarily impact immediately the taxpayers of the village. The village tries to anticipate these impacts by budgeting for a base dollar amount of these revenues in its general operation. But despite our best efforts, we can be exposed to the possibility of unrealized revenues or declines in the base revenue from year to year. In addition, this account could be used to offset appeals in assessment. Property assessments, property owners can appeal their assessments at various stages during the year, and it can often be a decision made by BC Assessment after the time that we have already budgeted, sent out tax notices, and they can be changed throughout the year, which might require a refund to a property owner. If this were to occur, we could use these funds as a stabilization reserve to mitigate that impact of lost revenue that year. The insurance and legal reserve would be used to offset the cost of insurance claims and deductibles, or the cost of major legal cost claims, the magnitude and timing of which isn't often determinable. The election reserve, at this point in time, elections are held every 4 years. And what's occurred in the past is that we have just incurred all costs in one single year. We're proposing the addition of this reserve where it can be funded on an annual basis with an amount put into reserve for those costs which occur every 4 years, or in the event of a by-election occurring. The Employee Future Benefits Reserve is a fund that's an associated liability is estimated by actuarial valuation. That is shown on the financial statements, the balance sheet every year. Currently, it's about $129,000 is the estimated actuarial liability for this expense. And this reserve could be put aside to help fund some, all, or part of that liability. The last operating reserve that we're proposing here, the reserve account, is a fire department operating reserve. This would be used to offset any unexpected operating costs experienced by the fire department. These, again, are emergent situations. They can't be anticipated and budgeted for, and it's not feasible to absorb the cost of such events in other budget areas in any given year. So before I move on, does any member of council have a question about the reserve accounts?
I'll move around the table. Councillor Hooper.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I do believe that, I think it was Councillor Palmer did ask in the past about actually having a copy of what was in each reserve. It might have helped on some of this, but are these reserves going to be protected? I mean, are we going to be able to take money from one to shore up the other? I mean, because the fire department reserve and the financial stabilisation reserve almost seem similar. Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Yeah, as I say, the fire department reserve, the idea for this one is that it's for operating expenditures in the fire department that are unexpected. Might be, for example, they require a lot of recruiting in 1 year if they were to see a loss of membership and needed to spend a lot more money 1 year to do this. The goal would be, as I've included further down in an appendix that I'll talk separately, but just mentioned here, would be that should the fire department have surplus related to them from 1 year, we could use that to help fund this particular account. Whereas the financial stabilization reserve is really more to do with loss of revenues, unexpected losses of revenues versus unexpected expenditures.
The CEO has a comment.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hooper. I'm glad that this issue has been highlighted because I just wanted to make note of the fact that it's been our practice, although not ensconced in policy until now, that all funds raised through taxation for fire department operations stay within a fire department budget. So unlike other departments wherein if there's a surplus at year end, it goes into general surplus unless it's directed to a particular reserve. All monies that are budgeted for the fire department, if they're unspent at year end, stay in a fire department reserve. And we feel that this is an important principle so that the public knows and the fire department knows that taxes that are raised for fire protection stay with fire protection.
Thank you. Carry on, councillor.
Yes, so when each of these reserves reach their maximum level, what happens to any extra money after that? Is it not taken out? Is it?
Ms. Jones?
So as far as putting monies into the reserve, that would be the proposal and the guidance here is that the financial officer would bring information to council each year as part of the budgeting process. If we are at the maximum of what council feels for the guidelines in one particular reserve, and we have reserve monies going in, council would then be able to make the choice as to which other reserve should have money go into it. So it would be a council decision as part of the budgeting process. For just a very rough example, if you had $500,000 you put into reserve, we would give an update to council at the budget time where things are at, and then council would make the decision of which reserves needed to, basically where the 500,000 would be dispersed, which reserves. If one was at a maximum, council could then say, this one has reached the maximum. I would advise at that point, and based on the guidelines, and then advise council where it may be best used then for future years. But it would be a council decision at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff, firstly, thank you. I really appreciate the timeliness of the report on top of everything else that staff has had to be dealing with since December. So I appreciate the support of council when I brought this up, and to staff for creating the draft for us. It clearly shows the purpose behind the reserves, and that it's not just money sitting there, so we might as well kind of spend it type of theory. So I think the proposed reserve accounts are bang on, and I think you guys have hit the nail on the head with it. I especially like the elections reserve account, so we're not left scrambling or taking from that final year budget in order to plan for the elections. And like was mentioned, if there was a by-election that should arise at some time. I don't have any specific questions. I do like that we now know about all of the accounts that are sitting there and the purpose behind them, and I think it shows responsible saving. It's proactive financial responsibility, and it's much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. Just a simple question, actually. So I understand the mechanism of how the money goes in, and it can be determined by council. In terms of the money coming out of a reserve, would I assume that that would always be by council resolution in terms of using the funds from any of the reserves? Would it always be by council resolution?
Yes, under the administrative section of this policy, what I identified there was that the use of funds would be either through the normal budgeting bylaw process or by council resolution. So if something occurred during the year after the budget's been established and council needed to identify, it would be by council resolution at that time. So either of those two processes.
And so in either way, controlled by council. Thank you very much.
Decision of council, yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vidal.
Thank you, Your Worship, and certainly thank you to staff for developing this draft policy. Just a couple of questions through you to our financial officer. On page 7, under the glossary, I'm just not quite sure of the distinction between number 1, accumulated surplus, and number 6, unappropriated surplus. Perhaps our financial officer could explain a little bit more to me. Thank you.
Jones.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the accumulated surplus is the accumulation year over year of surplus. And surpluses then are basically split up into those that council has put into a reserve and those that are unappropriated, which means that there's been no identifiable use or measure of the funds. So it's just like a general surplus that hasn't been identified for a specific task or a specific reserve.
Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And just one other general question, Your Worship, probably directing it to CAO. At this point, it is only designated as a policy. And I'm wondering the merits, or if it's appropriate to look at drafting a bylaw, or corporate officer or CAO feel that it's fine just to leave it as a policy at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I'll leave it to the finance officer to add to my comments if she wishes. But I think one of the things that we recognized in reviewing Tracy's draft of this policy is that this document is somewhat aspirational, not so much legislative. So although some of these statutory bylaws will be, and capital, statutory funds, reserve funds, and capital reserve funds have been or will be created by bylaw, because that's how the legislation is laid out. This overall guiding document, I think, is more appropriate as a policy. Tracy, did you have anything to add to that?
Jones.
Yes, this is more administrative in nature. The bylaws would be set individually for the reserves, and that's one of the discussion points today. I have further on in the slides. So that those things would be established, the actual reserves would be established by bylaw when necessary. And the thing about the policy is we may have to amend it on a regular basis if there becomes another reserve that has to be established. Sometimes we just receive funds from a specific source, and that has to be incorporated in. So this is more an administrative guide at this point, and the bylaw part is what is established for each reserve fund. So I'll be discussing that a little later on.
Does that help, Councillor?
Yes, it certainly does. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And moving on, please.
So moving on to the next set of reserves, these are called reserve funds, not reserve accounts. The reserve accounts don't require a bylaw to be established for them. These reserve funds, we'll talk about two areas where I've broken them down today. One's I'm just calling reserve funds. They're all by statute, but the statutory reserve funds I'll refer to later are very specific. So these ones are established by bylaw under section 188(1) of the Community Charter. They are discretionary by council to establish a reserve fund for a specified purpose, and council gets to direct money to be placed into these reserves. As I said, they're created for a specific purpose. We would establish minimum and optimal balances for them where appropriate. And a council resolution or adopted budget bylaw is required for all appropriations from these reserves. So as Councillor Palmer spoke to earlier, any expenditures from these reserves would be by council direction through a resolution or through the adopted budget bylaw. Here are the list of proposed reserve funds that we're making in this policy. Some of these we're proposing here, we already have in existence, and some we're proposing to amalgamate, and I've got some examples of that a little later on in the slides. So the proposed reserve funds are the office equipment, which would include IT equipment as well, and general buildings. When I refer to general buildings, what I mean is nothing that is related to water or sewer, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Storm drainage, transportation, parks and recreation, parkland acquisition and development, fire department equipment, public works equipment, sanitary sewer, water, and the community works gas tax fund. Sorry, my glasses are fogging up here. So these are the bylaws that we're proposing to be established through section 188.1 of the community charter. I'll just briefly go over what these are for. The office equipment one would include information technology, any furnishings that meet the capitalization threshold, and what we refer to as that is $5,000 or more. The general building reserve fund would be to fund the replacement, upgrade, or addition of building infrastructure, and that's building infrastructure that is not in sewer or water. And the reason for that is this account would be funded through taxation, and the sewer and water infrastructure needs we're proposing to fund through sewer and water funds that are raised through those funding sources. Storm drainage to fund the replacement, upgrade, or addition of storm drainage infrastructure. Transportation reserve. This is one that we're proposing to amalgamate to fund the replacement, upgrade, or addition of transportation infrastructure, as well as capacity building planning. This would include assets in the categories of roads, sidewalks, streetlights, bridges, as well as any parking or traffic management. Parks and Recreation Reserve Fund would be to fund parks and recreation infrastructure and furnishings. This would include, but it's not limited to, the assets in the classes of parks and other infrastructure such as the boat launch, docks, park furnishings, recreation, and tourism infrastructure. The Parkland Acquisition and Development Reserve Fund is to fund the acquisition of parkland, playground equipment, lighting, design, development, and improvement of parkland. The Fire Department Equipment Reserve Fund is for the purchase of fire department machinery and equipment for the protection of persons and property. The Public Works Equipment Reserve Fund would be for the purchase of capital machinery and equipment for public works use. The Sanitary Sewer Reserve Fund for capital renewals and additions to sanitary sewer infrastructure, including buildings, any equipment, and vehicles. Water Reserve Fund would be for capital renewals and additions to the water infrastructure, including buildings, equipment, and vehicles. And the Community Works Gas Tax Reserve Account is an account for funds received and used pursuant to the Community Works Gas Tax Agreement. Are there any questions on any of those proposed reserve funds at this time?
Councillor Piper.
No questions, just another applause to staff. Great proposals, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
Yes, thank you. It'd be nice to know what the minimum and maximum levels would be. I know that we've had reports back from Mr. Troy Davis when he was employed here on the storm drainage replacement and the deficiencies in their infrastructure, and the same with the sanitary sewer infrastructure. Now, the sanitary sewer infrastructure and water reserve fund, I mean, 100% of capital costs, we're talking millions, aren't we? It's not just 20, 30,000. If we're talking about replacing buildings, sewer infrastructure, equipment, lift stations and that. It'd be nice to find out what sort of timescale we'd have to actually meet the 50 or the 100% on the replacement cost on these.
Ms. Jones, you have a comment on that?
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Hoop and the rest of council. Yes, I would agree with you on that. And later on the slides, what I'm proposing is some next steps. Once council is in agreement with these sort of categories and everything, that I would come forward with another stage to this information. And that's where we would start to discuss minimum, maximum levels and where we're at, where we need to get to. And fully acknowledging that we are in the transition phase of this. We are, in many of the cases, we are not at the minimums and when we're not at the optimum levels. So it's a work in progress to start bringing the next steps forward after this.
Right, thank you. Also on the infrastructure, I mean, we had the Roads and Bridges Master Plan, and they come up with a cost funding for all the roads and bridges within the village. And again, that totals millions. So again, if you could give us a cost of the minimum and the maximum levels, along with any predicted timescales to reach these, would be,
Ms. Jones?
be helpful.
Thank you, Worship, through you to Councillor Hooper. On a further slide today, I have an example, just using one category, a fairly simple example using fire department equipment to give you an example of just where we're at and what that might take. It's certainly not as complex as the other things you talk about, but I wanted to sort of give council an example of where we might have to go on the next step to showing some of this information.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Where's my list? Survival?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no further questions at this time, perhaps in the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I don't really have a lot of questions. I have a small little concern, but it goes more to being nitpicky about terms. When I look at the Appendix A that sets out, again, I was looking at Parks and Recreation Reserve Fund. It talks about funding replacement, etc. And then it says to be used as matching funds for related grant funded projects as required. When I look at that, I read it two different ways. I look at it one way and I think, oh, we can fund replacement, but it must be used where there's matching funds available. And that's what it's for. Because it just, both sentences seem prescriptive. Again, maybe I'm reading too much into the schedule. I would have been happier to see to fund replacement, etc. And then where it says to be used, I'd like to say may be used as matching funds, because it may well be that we don't have matching funds on one of these things and we want to use it. Again, very nitpicky, I know, but when I look at it, something where it says to fund and to be used, I take it that both of those directions must be followed so that you can only use it with matching funds. So that's just my comment about the words used.
Thank you. I just have one small comment, Ms. Jones. Just under 4.5 Parks and Recreation Reserve Fund, at the bottom three, the bottom line there, recreation and tourism infrastructure. Now, wouldn't that tourism infrastructure come out of the RMI?
Tourism infrastructure would come out of the RMI for the initial purchase. But in this policy, once you purchase an item, you then have to make a decision on that particular item down the road, if it's an item that is going to be replaced on an ongoing basis. And it's my understanding that the RMI pays for the initial purchase, And then any replacement after that is the responsibility of the village, should they wish to continue on the replacement cycle. So that's why I have included it in this category.
Thank you. Please carry on.
So while the other bylaw, the other reserve funds are statutory by bylaw under section 181, there are other statutory reserve funds that have to be established. They're not discretionary to council, and I've separated them out to refer to these as statutory reserve funds, and under specifically section 188.2 of the Community Charter. These are funds that are received for specific purposes. Minimum and optimal balances are not applicable because we are receiving these for designated items. And they include things such as the development cost charges, which are water, sanitary sewer, storm drainage, and parks, parkland acquisition, land reserve, and community amenities. That is, the community amenities, although I've put it under this section, it's not actually part of the community charter, excuse me, but it is part of a policy that the village has. So just covering what these are. The development costs are established under section 188.2A of the Community Charter, and we need to have separate reserves for each of the established development cost charge collections. Their use is under section 566 of the Local Government Act. The village collects development cost charges for parks, storm drainage, sanitary sewer, and water. The Parkland Acquisition Reserve Fund is set up per section 188.2B of the Community Charter. Funds received from the sale or disposal of parkland, as well as funds received pursuant to section 941 of the Local Government Act, parkland funds received upon subdivision must be set aside in a reserve and be used exclusively to purchase parkland. This reserve has been established for that specific purpose. The Land Reserve Fund is per section 188.2E of the Community Charter. Funds received from the sale of the land and improvements must be set aside in a reserve fund for the purpose of paying any debt remaining in relation to the property and of acquiring land improvements and other assets of a capital nature. So if the funds are not required for debt payments relating to this, they can be used for acquiring other land improvements and other capital assets. The Community Amenities Reserve Fund. This is based on a policy of the village, and it's to set aside monies received from voluntary contributions, budgeted transfers, and current contributions for expenditures related to the construction of community amenities and facilities. Are there any questions from council on these specific statutory reserve funds?
Councillor Vidal.
No, nothing at this point, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Understood. Fine.
Thank you. Councillor Piper.
No questions at this time, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
No, I'm fine with this, thank you.
You carry on, Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Your Worship. So minimum and optimum balances. Minimal and optimal fund balance guidelines have been set for some of the villages operating and capital reserves. They're identified in the Appendix A and are up for further discussion with council. They're just some examples. In addition, what I want to show next is an example from the fire department. Councillor Hooper's reference to how much would we need and what are the guidelines on these reserves. I just want to show a fire department example. As I said earlier, it's a fairly simplistic one because we have a small amount of assets under that category, and it's probably a good one to use as an example here of the work we need to do moving forward. So fire department vehicles and equipment, the example. Currently, And I'm not including in the top, the fire truck that council has just made an approval to purchase at this point. So we have a 2012 Spartan truck. We have a 2018 Ford F-350 light rescue vehicle. We have in 2020 and 21, SCBA backpacks, mask, compressor, and tank that council approved and was purchased as the replacement of all those items. They have useful lives, anywhere from 10 to 13 years. The original purchase cost of these items was $615,000, just over $615,000. Their estimated replacement cost is $876,000 over the various terms of their life. So some of these, it's 10 years, some of these 15, 20, 30, up to 30 years. If we were to fully fund the replacement cost of these items over their useful lives, and this is just as one replacement cycle on these, we would have to put $48,833 into a reserve each year. In addition, we're going to add the replacement fire truck, which council's already approved and we anticipate coming in online in 2022. We know that has a purchase cost up to $685,000 approved by council. Its estimated replacement cost 30 years down the line, because it can be 20 years as a first line vehicle, it can be an additional 10 years as a second line vehicle, is estimated at $1,027,000. The reserve contribution increase for that vehicle, we would have to add another $34,000 roughly a year over its useful life to be able to replace it at that time and have saved enough money to fully fund this at our estimated replacement cost. What that means is the reserve contribution would need to be $83,000, which is the 48 plus the new 34. And currently our base contribution into the fire department is $45,000. What I haven't put on this slide is just so council's aware, as was mentioned earlier about fire department funds staying within fire department. We have in the past as a practice, if the fire department had operating surplus, we have been through the budget process, putting that additional funding into the fire department reserve account, because we do know that we are not on the optimal level for reserve monies going in. So we have started that practice over probably the last 4 years since I've been here. And it did enable us to meet the goal for replacing that one truck this year. Are there any questions on this very sort of simple example I tried to put together for council here?
Councillor Palmer?
No, fine, thank you.
Councillor Vidal?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to our financial officer, this reserve fund, would that also cover certain things like mechanical maintenance schedules for the apparatus or any repairs that need to be made to apparatus or equipment?
Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Worship, through you to council. No, it does not. This example takes into consideration only the capital purchase costs, just as a very simple example. Those other items you refer to are usually addressed in the operating budgets for the fire department.
Thank you for that
That's your
clarification.
question?
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Ms. Jones. Nothing further, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper?
Yes, thank you. I mean, looking at the figures here, basically, we would almost have to double our contribution to the fire reserve fund. I mean, it's getting on for 90,000. Looking at that and then taking into account what the other reserve funds might require on extra, we're talking some serious money. Can we afford this without actually increasing our taxes beyond a reasonable amount?
Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Hooper and the rest of council. The example I gave here is really what we would call the optimal or maximum amounts for the reserve, basing this on a fully funded reserve model through the only way you pay for a capital item is through reserve, and that comes from generally from taxation. The other options are to consider borrowing. The other options are to, and on all the categories of assets, grants when you have to replace items. So that's where your grant funding becomes more essential. And then on top of that, council would have to consider whether borrowing was an option in any of these cases. So those are essentially the three key options. It's either funding your reserve fully, funding it partially, and then using a lot of grant applications or borrowing through the Municipal Finance Authority.
Councillor?
Yeah, so funding it fully would actually mean the taxpayers of the village actually contributing towards this.
That's under the general category of things. That is where funding for this comes from. Yes.
Thank you. So it would be useful, let's say you're working on it, if we could have something similar to this on all the other reserve funds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Piper?
Thank you, Worship. I have no questions. It just drives home the importance of these accounts, as well as the long-term planning required and the hard decisions that land on council's table. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to take this opportunity with council to introduce another item related to our assets, and it is related to this topic of reserves because it is a potential impact or a decision council may have to make with regards to funding of reserves. So there is a new requirement under the Public Sector Accounting Standards, PS 3280. They're called asset retirement obligations. They have a legislative requirement to remediate hazards upon renovation of or disposal of an asset. They have to be a calculated cost. They must be expensed over the remaining useful life of an asset. This includes any assets on leased land, whereas the requirement within the lease to remediate or return the property back to its original condition at the end of a lease. And this will come into effect and be effective for fiscal years after April 2022. So for the purpose of the village, in our financial statements of 2023, we will be having to calculate and recognize the expenditures in relation to this new public sector accounting standard. The most common example of this type of asset retirement obligation are in buildings prior to 1990 that contain lead or asbestos. So whether or not it is your intention to demolish a building at its end of useful life or to do a mass renovation on a building, if it has lead or asbestos, a calculated cost has to be made for what it would cost to remediate that property at its deemed end of useful life. And we would have to account for it in our records. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to bring it to council's attention. This is something we're going to have to be working on. And the reason it has a relevance to the reserve policy is whether or not council wants to include these costs in the calculation of where an optimal level of reserve funding should lie. So I just wanted to bring this to council's attention for the first time. Okay. Consolidating reserves. So what I'm also proposing here, and with the reserve groupings that we had earlier, is to consolidate some of the very small reserves which are ineffective the way they are. The bylaws have outdated language, and we'd like to establish clear, concise bylaws where we require them for all reserve funds. So giving you a couple of examples here, the current road, sidewalk, bridge, parking reserve accounts, which were not set up under bylaw, would be consolidated to a transportation reserve fund, and we would establish the reserve fund by bylaw. Another example would be the beach, dock, boat launch, wharf reserve accounts, which we would consolidate to a Parks and Recreation Capital Reserve Fund. We would therefore have less smaller accounts and more consolidated accounts that are for a broader group of assets. Any questions from council? And
Councillor Piper,
No questions, Your Worship. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, just a couple. I mean, we say the beach, dock and boat launch all have their own reserve accounts to consolidate them within the Parks and Recreation one. Now, isn't the Parks Fund a protected one, that any money comes out of the Park Recreational Fund actually has to be spent on the parks?
Ms. Jones?
no, that's not as you specified funds. Back in the groups that I showed you, this is a fund that would be set up by council by bylaw. There is a park acquisition one, and that one I think is the one you're referring to. That is a specified thing. So we're separating those out. Those which are specified and very much designated for that specific thing you've identified, and those which are the discretionary decisions of council would be in this one.
Right, but I'd hate to see us robbing Peter on these to pay Paul. And on the bridge, the road, sidewalk, bridges and parking account, now I take it that would include street lighting, street cleansing, lineage and inspections of all roads and bridges.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the group of things you said.
Yeah, it says road, sidewalk, bridge and parking. Now, would that include street lighting, the signage that we have, inspections of the bridges, because that, as I understand it, we're paying out this year for another set of bridge inspections and that, would that all come from this reserve account?
So when I refer to the consolidation of this, these particular items were ones where small reserves existed. And then we were going into the bigger transportation reserve fund, which I think if we go back and I can just reread what we would include in that transportation. So it's assets that are included in the categories of roads, sidewalks, streetlights, bridges, and parking and traffic management. So it's that category of assets that we currently have listed in there. So that's where we would now amalgamate these tiny things into one large ones and incorporate all those assets into them. The signage, it would not include, we're not including maintenance of that. It is all capital. We're looking at capital replacement on this.
It wouldn't include the paid inspection of the bridges?
The inspection of the bridges. I don't believe that's coming out of that account at this time. I believe that was funded from gas tax funds
Yeah,
this year.
again, it's consolidating everything into one reserve fund leads me to think that so we could be, again, looking at one item and taking it away from somewhere else. It's something I have to think about. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Vidal?
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, Ms. Jones. I do support this. I think it's a good idea. As long as consolidation of these accounts would sort of like be broad enough to allow for a high level of discretionary spending on part of council. Could you comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. The idea is to really to consolidate for the replacement, reserve funds for replacement of like-minded assets. That's why we have identified them as transportation assets. And I could certainly use, change some wording and say that that it includes, but is not limited to the assets of and the examples I've given, if that would assist.
Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think that may be something that council should consider. I don't believe a decision needs to be made today, and I offer it only as a suggestion at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer.
I'm fine. I have no questions.
Thank you. Carry on, Ms. Jones.
So just a brief discussion on reserves. So any transfers to reserves, they are internal transactions. They're a planned allocation of revenues. They are included in the 5-year financial plan. So this will be something that we would bring forward as part of the start of the budget process for council's consideration. And they build capacity for future needs. So that's the intent of council's decisions on transfers to reserves. The next item I wanted to talk about was what Councillor Vidal mentioned earlier, unappropriated surplus. So the village needs to maintain balances in 3 operating funds for working fund purposes to provide for operating expenditures prior to property taxes and or user fees being collected. The 3 funds are general, water, and sewer. General essentially meaning anything that is not in water and sewer. Maintaining minimum working fund levels eliminates or reduces the need to borrow externally and or internally for operations. The village may also require emergency funds from time to time from one of its unappropriated surplus balances for unforeseen costs. What I'm presenting here in this example is how much operating expenses, excluding amortization, or otherwise known as our cash flow working funds, we need in a 2-month, 4-month, or 6-month period. So based on the 2021 budget, I've taken the operating costs, excluding the amortization for the year from each of these particular funds, the general, the sewer, and water. And so on just averaging them out over the year, if we went with a 2-month, 4-month, or 6-month, you can see the numbers here. The ones I've highlighted in yellow are my suggestions and recommendations for how much should be kept in the unappropriated surplus for working funds. And the reason I selected the 6 months is that we receive our largest income at the beginning of July is the tax deadline. So theoretically, we need to have cash flow for the first 6 months of the year prior to receiving our largest income. So I calculated here and said the optimal amount would be to keep about $1.7 million in the general fund for working funds, 329,000 in the sewer, and 174,000 in water. That is the optimal just for the working cash flow. You may see also if you've read through to the appendix, I'm also suggesting some additional funds on top of that just for emergent purposes. So are there any questions on the working fund example there before I move forward on this?
Councillor Hooper.
No further questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Weigel.
No, Your Worship, nothing further.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
No, nothing further.
Thank you. Councillor Piper.
Questions?
Thank you. Carry on, Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Your Worship. So included in this policy, I've attached an Appendix A, which is a summary of the reserve and surplus policy. It summarizes the proposed reserves, surpluses, use, and minimum and optimum limits. It's a table I hopefully identified to make things a little easier to see all in one place. With this guide and transition time, the minimum and optimal fund balance guidelines shown in this policy serve as a guide in moving the village towards the goals or targets it wishes to attain in terms of individual fund balances. It is recognized that the village's fund balances are not at the minimum or optimal level at the time of enacting this policy. However, the village is transitioning towards its optimal targets. So the next steps that I'm proposing here. So steps would be the adoption of the reserve and surplus policy. With that, we would then create the reserve bylaws and repeal any old bylaws that are in existence. Council would be to approve recommendations for the annual contributions to reserves. Council would approve recommendations for any transfers from unappropriated surplus to reserve. And then we'd incorporate reserve funding in the 5-year financial plan. That's essentially the next steps. What I'm proposing to do is to bring forward in the next meeting of the Committee of the Whole, something more in detail on what those recommendations, the creation of the reserves, etc. I've listed the reserves here that we would like to create if council is in agreement with them. And we could go forward with starting with the next steps with more of examples of what the reserve balances should be. If that's it, if council's in agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Is that it?
Yep, that's it for
We're all done
today.
then.
Just questions from council.
Any comments from council? Councillor Weigel?
No, I'm satisfied, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer?
Nothing, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Piper?
Nothing further, just looking forward to the next steps.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yeah, just one. On the slide you showed regarding the retirement of buildings as such.
Yes.
Asbestos and lead and that. Would that also include like this? I know with the wastewater station at the moment, there's a legislation coming out regarding the actual amount of drugs that people flush down the toilet and that. So obviously that material that comes out of the wastewater station wouldn't be able to go into farmlands. We'd have to pay extra for that. And when it comes to redoing the wastewater station, we'd have to actually incorporate the proper filtration system to remove these drugs and the rest of it. So that would include all that as well.
CAO has a
The
comment?
CAO has a comment on that one.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hooper. Those types of regulations are governed by our operating permit, governed by the province through the Ministry of Environment. So it's not related to the eventual retirement of the asset.
Yeah, I mean, the retirement of our assets would be if it could no longer meet our requirements.
The retirement of the asset could be for any given reason.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other questions from council, we have haven't had the recommendation yet, have we? No. So the recommendation, before I do this, I want to thank the financial officer for, I think, a very well thought out report. And I like the moving ahead with the ideas, bring back to council as well, and really showing the council these reserves in more detail. I think that's a very important issue that was brought forward by Councillor Piper, was it, I believe, earlier on this year, and that staff have done an excellent job here, and I want to thank the Ms. Jones and her staff for this, I call it an outstanding report, and thank you very much. That the draft reserve and surplus policy be approved. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Piper. Call the question. All in favour?
Aye, Your Worship.
Aye, 3. Anybody opposed? That the draft reserve and surplus policy be approved. That's the recommendation. Yes, ma'am.
Just for clarification, Your Worship, this policy will come back to council at a regular meeting for adoption.
Yeah, all information from committee of the wholes do come back to the council. Okay, thank you. That's now called it. Now, were you in favor? Everybody in favor? Thank you. Motion passes.
Yes, Your Worship, we'll move on to the next item, and that is a report from the Community Services Manager, and this is regarding an off-leash dog park.
Michelle?
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is to provide some background and context around planning for an off-leash, dog park. In 2013, the village designated a portion of Rendell Park as an off-leash dog park area on a trial basis, but the initiative was discontinued due to conflicts between off-leash dog and other park users. In 2016, council received a report for consideration of a dog park on the forested lot east of the Harrison Hot Springs Fire Hall, but council did not proceed with this proposal. As you can see in the following table, there are many considerations in planning for a park of this nature. Ongoing costs such as operations, management, enforcement, and maintenance also need to be considered. The attached map shows 6 areas that may be available for park development. Should council direct staff to work on establishing an off-leash dog park, staff is seeking direction on 1 to 3 desired locations and approval to conduct further public consultation to assess the broad community support and desired amenities for an off-leash dog park. The recommendation is that the off-leash dog park report be received. Thank you.
Sorry, we have a recommendation here. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Piper. Discussion. We'll start off with Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. Certainly the issue of an off-leash dog park comes to the forefront quite often in Harrison. And I know the general idea is a good one, and I think we should move forward. I think the devil in the detail is where does it go and what does it cost? And that's going to be the challenge. A lot of people in Harrison have dogs. It's probably the doggiest village I've ever seen. We have 2 dogs, although I know we would not use an off-leash dog park. But I do think enough people would. It seems to me, in my mind, the most important issue that it not inconvenience or not cause noise or disruption to any existing neighborhoods. So locating the dog park, it seems to me, needs to be where there's the least amount of residences. I don't want to see it in an existing park. I mean, obviously my house backs onto Spring Park, so I don't want it in Spring Park, but that's not my reasoning. Spring Park has a lot of people. It has pickleball, it has tennis players. All of those things cause dogs to bark. So I don't want to try and accommodate people who wish a place for their dogs to run by inconveniencing or causing serious problems for people in a neighborhood that have to hear the dogs bark. So I think going forward with the study and getting some feedback is an excellent idea. There's obviously a lot of community support for that. The challenge, of course, as I said, is I want it in an area where it doesn't cause a lot of disruption to anyone. And at the same time, if you put it far enough south in the village, for instance, where there's maybe land on McCombs, you're so far away from a lot of the users that they might not find that it's helpful to be able to take their dogs there. Although I gather people would drive if necessary. So I'm supportive of going forward. In terms of locations, I know it's going to be very, very, very challenging. And of course, then there's the cost issue. If it costs us $50,000, $60,000 for fencing, that's 2 or 3% of an annual budget. So it's not insignificant. But I do want to see us go ahead. I looked through the report. I don't have huge numbers of questions, other than I just know what priorities I have when I would vote on it. But I would certainly the property on McCombs that is, I think it's 1 acre, that would seem maybe to be the least disruptive to people. But even as I said that, I know there's people who live across the street from it. So it's one of those things where you're not going to find any area where it doesn't cause some challenges, where barking dogs could cause a problem. I may wish to speak again on the topic, but I'll end now. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Hey, Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support the overall concept, but as was outlined in the report, Council has had the matter before them a few times before, and I think finding the ideal location has been the challenge. I mean, I'm a dog and animal lover. I've had a dog almost my whole life as of just the last recent few years, no dog, but and I think there's benefits and drawbacks to a dog park. The number one thing that comes up for me is the limited areas within the village to set up, and I can't see it being successful being set up in a neighborhood. I mean, because of the noise. And nothing against the dogs. As I said, I love animals, but they're just out there having fun and playing and barking, and which is all great and fabulous. But the other side of that is the humans that need to listen to the play occur. So I think in order to move forward with this, I think perhaps we could select the top 3 locations, or brainstorm over that, or put that back out to our residents and have 3 locations picked through a poll or whatever staff can come up with as an effective tactic or tool. And after top 3 locations are chosen, that block by block engagement is conducted in and around those areas. Sound travels like almost no other place because of the village environment, I think, how the sound bounces. So I think sound can travel quite a distance, and which is a good thing on Canada Day when we're listening to the fireworks and hearing the boom off the mountains, but it may not be enjoyable for everybody listening listening to dogs having a great time in the park. So I think, and as mentioned in staff's report, I think engagement is going to be key, and that will be the only way for me, quite frankly, is to feel comfortable with a location being chosen. We all live in each kind of sector of the village, so I don't think, I can't see an ideal location because they're all near neighborhoods and would have a negative effect on that neighborhood. In addition to all of that, I'd be curious about the legalities behind a dog park if there was an unfortunate incident. I would be interested to learn from staff the type of facility that we could offer, what type of maintenance that means for us over the years. I mean, we just came out of a long discussion about reserves, and I'm sure that's given a bit of a reality check for many about how lean the dollars are and how far we need to stretch them, and all of the pieces of the pie that we need those dollars to stick to. So, and also in addition to that is the cost of staff. There would be maintenance and another area to check and make sure is safe and clear for use. So, and then the cost of erecting the park itself and furnishing it, as well as having the water facility available for dogs to drink from and perhaps to rinse them off depending on the surface. And yeah, so lots of lots of things for me there, but I think first we need to take the temperature of our lovely community and see if overall the community's in support, and then move on from there and identify a top 3 or top 5 locations, and then dig even deeper and deal with and extract the comments and feedback from those residents that would be directly affected. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Hooper.
Yes, thank you. It's not just the residents that require a dog park, it's the tourists as well that use the campgrounds. You see them all day long with their dogs on leash, taking them down to the beachfront and the rest of it. We need a dog park that is somewhere easy accessible, not only to residents, but also to the tourists. And if it comes to actually on about cost of fencing it, as it's going to be partly for the tourists, I'm sure that some MRI money could actually go towards this. Now, the area I was looking at, we've got areas suggested here that are in wooded areas. If it's in wooded areas, people aren't going to see where their dogs foul, and they're not going to be able to pick it up. So it's just going to become one big dog toilet. You need an area which is fairly open with some shade and easy access where we can supply water. And the area for this would be behind the village office. It would also allow us to keep the overflow car park for days such as the Sasquatch days, the dragon boats and the rest of it. So it becomes a dual purpose. Now, it would have to have an operating times, because you don't want a dog park open of a night time. And being behind the village office, if there is any complaints or anything, the staff are there. They can phone up the bylaw officer and get them down to deal with it. They can phone up the animal control office. Yes, it's not going to be cheap, but it's probably the best area because it's on location going down to the beachfront, and tourists will see it and they'll be able to exercise their dogs, then take them back to their campsites, and we won't have the problems with dogs on the beachfront. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vital.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am actually in support of a dog park in our village. I think as our population increases and we have more residential development, with that does come an increase in dog ownership. Reading through the report, was a kind of 4 criteria that I came up with that perhaps will help eventually move my decision to the location. One of the biggest ones was accessibility for parking. I don't believe that, and one of the suggestions that Michelle had put in her report was Woods Park. That is in a major residential area, and I would definitely not be in favor of that location. That is a neighborhood and community park that is still used for family events and even residential gatherings. So the other locations that have been suggested, the 2 along Hot Springs Road, again, I see some level of difficulty with parking access, either the fire hall or the parkland by the water treatment plant. To me, and I do agree very much with Councillor Piper's comments on public engagement on the issue. And I think that that is paramount and should be step 1 before we move further ahead. I also have some concerns about liability to the village. And I'm not sure that sort of insurance that the village currently has would cover that. For instance, if, you know, some resident or visitor, you know, twisted their ankle or broke their ankle while they were exercising their dog there, what liability would the village be facing? And again, also costs. I'm, you know, not prepared to make any decision one way or the other. And I do know that this is just to introduce the concept once again to council. And perhaps one other area that hasn't been identified by Michelle, which came to my mind, is McCombs and McPherson. I do believe that, and perhaps Mayor Facio could elaborate on that. I do believe that that was posed as a potential site a few years ago when the issue of the dog park did come to council. So I'm all in favor and supportive of Councillor Piper's suggestion that number 1 should be some public engagement and identification of some locations before we move any further. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. I make some comments. I'm just going to hand it over to our corporate officer just to answer the question in regards to McPherson and the McCombs corner there, which I believe is provincial land, and also it was an area where the old village garbage site used to be as well. So I don't know whether that's that is the appropriate place to have that. Well, maybe the corporate officer has can answer that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a point of clarification for council. That particular area that I believe she is speaking about is, used to be an investigative use permit, was located down at the corner. It was 4 acres. That particular permit expired a number of years ago. So those lands, everything has reverted back to the Crown.
That answers that question for you, I think, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through you to
Yeah.
the corporate office. Yes, that does give me the clarification I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a few comments and then hand it over to Councillor Piper, who's got a hand up as well. I've been involved in this with other councillors over the years, and we've gone through several sites from Randall Park, Canoe Cove, Fly Hall Park, Chestnut Lot, and Spring Park. All those areas, plus all the areas that are shown. By the way, thank the staff for putting this together. You may recall that maybe a year or 18 months ago, when we had an open house, forget what it was for, it could have been for the cultural center, whatever it was, we did have a section laid out there with a map for people to come in and discuss whether they wanted a dog park. And I don't think we had one person at that time come forward from that perspective. All these local, wherever Harrison has a small footprint, just under 3 square miles. And like Councillor Piper says, we're surrounded by mountains. If you cough hard enough, they can hear you all around the village. But that is the problem, is the echoing sound. And I love dogs. I've had 2 or 3, well, I've had 2. We've still got a small one now. But the echoing of dogs barking, and a lot of people do like to take their dogs out early in the morning, you know, for early walks. So the neighborhoods will be compacted with the noise, whether it be in any of these locations or whether it be the one that Councillor Hooper mentioned, the empty lot. There's a seniors complex behind that as well, with some 40 homes that would impact that as well. And I'm sure whether it's myself, when things get back to normal, or whether it's our staff, we haven't got the time if we're having a meeting to have dogs barking right next to where we're having a meeting. So that becomes a problem as well. It seems the obvious place, but it is on the main drag as well. And at the moment, it is an overflow parking when it's needed. The other locations on the Campbell Lake Trail, that was the land that was donated to us. That I'm not sure how much work that needs there. It drops quite a bit. And of course, the vacant, the 1 acre opposite the community park, vegetable allotment there on Chestnut and McCombs, that has come up before as a discussion point. The cost here is going to be quite a bit. In the outline that you have here, lighting, shade provision, pathways, segregation, enforcement, all additional capital costs would be added to take care of that. It's not an easy solution. I've only had 2 calls in the last couple of days from 2 residents against the proposal. I'm not sure how many letters have come in the last few months from residents regarding, I get a sign from our corporate officer, only 1 has come into the office regarding a possible dog park. There, of course, has been brought out problems with the liability concerns, obviously. This is dealt a lot with the regional district as our dog handlers with liability issues, and it's not an easy situation with liability issues. It's a long process and very costly, even when it comes down to animals. I think the way to go here to get into this later, this is not going to be an overnight situation, is that we probably should get some input from, as suggested, from the residents through a survey to see who really wants a dog park And are they prepared, excuse me, to pay towards the extra costs? It could be in taxation towards this. I'm not sure whether I would say at the moment, the RMI would probably not pay for that. I don't think that's part of their, no, I didn't think so. The RMI would pay towards that. And I think that's probably the way to go to get some more input before we move any further, because any location is going to be impacted by neighborhoods and noise complaints, and that's going to be one of the largest things here to try and deal with. So that being said, Councillor Piper, you had another comment?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I just wanted to, and perhaps if it does go out to the public for their feedback, we may find that there are people saying, yes, please, in my backyard. So I'm willing to eat my words if that comes back. I just want to be sure that I add to the long list of things that I would like looked into if this process moves ahead is I believe the site should also be accessible. Where everything that we're doing now is moving that to be inclusive and accessible to our residents and our visitors. So I would like that added to a list of items that I mentioned earlier. Also investigating whether washroom facilities and what those look like for a site for the humans. And also due to some of the locations, I would like to also have assurance that vegetation, plant and tree protection would be undertaken as well, and what that would look like for us. So I'd like to put a motion on the floor that staff conduct public feedback practice with the community to extract their desire for having a dog park in the community, and secondarily that they choose a location by a provided map that staff would create.
So Councillor Piper has moved that. Is there any discussion on her comments from council? I think Councillor Hooper. Oh, sorry, the corporate officer.
Yes, Your Worship, just for process here, can we have a motion to receive the report, and then we'll entertain Councillor Piper's motion?
We did have a motion to receive it.
Could you call on that question, please?
Oh, so we'll call on the question to receive the report first. It was moved. All in favor of the report? Sure, everybody's in favor of the report. Yes, Councillor Vidal?
I am in favor.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes on that. And now Councillor Piper has moved that the staff conduct a public feedback in regards to this dog park situation. Is there any discussion on this? Councillor Hooper.
Yes, a general discussion. I mean, there's been a lot said about, dogs continuously barking. Now, I've been to the dog parks with all my 3 dogs and the rest of it. And the people that are there don't want their dogs barking, but everybody there, every dog owner is talking or drinking coffee or something like that. If I was down at the Sardis dog park yesterday, you could have heard a pin drop, and there were 20 large dogs in the dog park. It's a bit of a fallacy because it's a dog park. The occasional dog will bark, but when it comes to liability, the liability is if you take your dog into a dog park and let it off leash and it bites another dog, you know that dogs are going to fight and bite each other. The staff all need or everybody here needs to go down to Sardis Dog Park on the old army base and just spend 2-3 hours there and listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to reply to your comment, Councillor, funny that one of the calls I received yesterday was from that park, and I'm just quoting what the person said, that they take their dog there frequently, and the neighbours nearby come over to complain they wish there wasn't a dog park there. Now, this is what was quoted to me. So there is contradictions from people. I say that obviously, I mean, you can see it every day on the, especially weekends on the promenade at the front here, when dogs are passing each other, they will bark at each other. It's virtually impossible to stop a dog from barking. But anyway, that's not to get into a big discussion. It's just a comment that I received.
The Sardis Dog Park, there is no houses around there. It's the old army base. You've got the river one side, you've got the road the other. There is no residential areas around there apart from Garrison Crossing, which is a good quarter of a mile, half a mile away. Thank you.
Councillor Palmer.
Just a couple of comments. Councillor Piper's motion, which I think is a good motion of going forward. We obviously need some consultation. The word she used was choose a site, and I don't think that would be really the word we want. We want input onto the site. I don't think we want the survey. We want people to actually feel that they're choosing a site. So by having people input in and maybe answer questions about how they would feel about having a dog park in their neighborhood would be useful. I just wanted to kind of return, like I do feel there's a lot of support in the community for a dog park. So I think that that it's important to explore this and see where we go with this. I do want to make the point that I don't think just because we put a dog park, it eliminates all dog issues in the community. I know the thought is, well, if you have a dog park, you won't have dogs running on the beach anymore. Yes, I think you will. Dogs will continue to be out. Many people will not take their dogs to dog parks. Maybe many people will find that the dog park, wherever we pick it, is not close enough to their residence. People will continue to enjoy walking their dog on the beach. In the mornings, people will continue to let their dogs run loose because they want their dogs to go into the lagoon, into the lake, in spite of whatever rules there are. So that will continue. I do not think that just because we have a dog park, it ends all issues of dogs running free in various places. However, although I don't think it's a solution to that, if a lot of people that do normally follow the rules feel that this gives them an option of letting their dog run in Harrison, then I think it's worth going forward. But I just wanted to make the point, I don't think an off-leash dog park will solve all the problems, because I know a lot of people, or what I can observe, a lot of people want their dog to run in the lake and do so at times when they think that they won't get caught doing it, or they go down to the hotel where there's a general belief that there's not enforcement, and I think the belief is probably true. So again, I don't think it's a panacea for all issues. There are a lot of people who will not take their dogs to a dog park. But at the same time, enough people in Harrison seem to wish to do that. So yes, having a survey that gives us some feedback on that would be very helpful. So we're not just anecdotally sensing from what we're hearing. I think that would be really good, and some initial input on a location. But I really do think the location is going to be the challenge, because I do think dogs do bark, and not only do dogs in the dog park bark, but if you put a dog park in an area where there are already dogs that are out in your backyard, your dogs will bark at the dogs in the dog park. And so you better then be prepared to not allow your dogs in your own backyard, lest they start barking at dogs at the dog park. So there are complications, and everything can be balanced. There's complications in all decisions we make. So it's a balancing issue. So I look forward to the broadest possible public consultation. I'm supportive of Councillor Piper's motion, other than I wish the word were, rather than that they choose a site, because that suggests an end decision, that they simply input into a site would make me mildly happier. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a comment.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I just wanted to check on the wording of the motion. I just want to confirm that this captures the spirit of the motion, that staff conduct a public consultation process to gauge the level of public support for a dog park and to indicate their desired location.
Now, Councillor Piper, are you in agreement with Councillor Palmer's question regarding we shouldn't give the public locations?
Yes, and I thank Councillor Palmer for the correction. I was just saying that off the top of my head, so thank you for that. And I thank staff for the clarification on the motion. I think it picks up the spirit of my intent beautifully. Thank you.
Is that okay, Chair? Yep, thank you on that. The Councillor Vidal, you have any comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I want to go back to the concern that I had regarding costs. And I'm wanting to offer an amendment to Councillor Piper's motion that we also include in the survey a question on how our residents view how a dog park would be funded, whether they're agreeable to a possible increase in taxes if necessary to fund it and maintain it. I think that's a valuable issue and one that I do believe may be beneficial to include it in the survey. Thank you.
That could be a friendly amendment. No? That's fine. When they make that as a friendly amendment. Yeah, I did mention that as well, Councillor, in my original in regards to the costs, whether the taxpayers would be prepared if it does come down to a tax increase for a dog park, and of course there's maintenance involved. It's not just the initial cost. And I think Councillor Hooper has his hand up.
Yeah, no, I object to the actual cost being actually included in this, because we don't ask residents if they want a playground. Are they going, how's it going to be funded through taxation and that? We don't ask them about street lighting, if they want extra street lighting. Are they prepared to fund it? This is just, to me, is just there's no other way of saying, of trying to get out of including a dog park. Thank you.
I think from the conversations we've had this morning, Councillor, with all due respect, so everybody's in favour of a dog park. Nobody said they're not in favour. They're all making different suggestions, which is part of the dialogue when you're having a council meeting, that all councillors put in their ideas and suggestions toward. All good ideas from all of you have come forward this morning, and there's no harm in letting the public know that certain projects that we carry out are either funded through gas tax or through RMIs or through grant programs and everything else. So I think, and funny enough, I was asked that same question last night. What would the cost be to the taxpayers? Of course, I didn't have an answer. So I think it's not an inappropriate question to ask, because some people, when you're walking around the village, what did that cost us? And when it's explained to them, it didn't cost them nothing. It was funded through something. But here we don't really have a particular fund for dog parks. We have funding and reserves for parks, but not for a dog park. So I think it's an appropriate question, but you're going to have another question, I believe.
Yeah.
Carry on.
I'll go back to it. We don't say to residents, oh, this, you want a new sidewalk, that's going to cost you, or to other things. We have lots of items come here, and we don't ask, or we don't put in it, how would you like this funded? Or were you prepared to fund this? This, to me, is just totally out of order. Thank you.
I will disagree with you, Councillor, because when these different projects come before council, they are budgeted for and in the budget. Dog park is not in our budget. So that's how way things are funded, as you very well know. You've attended, like all of us, all budget meetings, and anything comes forward, whether it's a sidewalk or a planter to be put in, if it's not in a grant situation, we put it into the budget. Now, a dog park has not been budgeted for. That's the important question here. It's not in our budget, so where's the money going to come from? Thank you. Any other questions? No, so on the amendment, when the friendly amendment, all in favor?
Aye, Your
Opposed?
Worship.
Aye, everybody in favor? Yes, thank you. Everybody's in favor? Oh, you're opposed, okay. You're opposed to the amendment, okay. Councillor Hooper is opposed to the amendment. The motion passes. Next order of business, please.
Yes, Your Worship, the next item is adjournment.
Move for adjournment, moved by Councillor Palmer. Thank you, everybody. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for a good input this morning from council. And of course, thank you to our staff for the excellent presentation. It's been a good morning of discussion, and thank you all again. Have a great weekend and stay safe.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.